Yeah, Hunter, the risk was real. I hadn't ever heard of pre-seed funding, so that's why I'm always intrigued about it today. I thought that how you kind of get the business off the ground is putting your own capital in, developing a product that's used by customers, and then showing that you've solved a problem and you have some traction, and then seeking some external funding. And so that was just my mind approach. And so before I resigned, we absolutely got our house refinanced and was able to get equity out of the home and made some life decisions where we were able to free up some capital within our household budget, and kind of allocated some money and said, like, listen, you have to run as fast as you can to be able to get that product market fit, because this money is going to run out. And so that's definitely the burn the boat mentality, and you've got a lot of motivation to work hard and work fast.
Welcome to this episode of Abstraction, a podcast that, with the help of Australia and New Zealand's leading entrepreneurs, investors and experts, breaks down the complexity of emerging tech trends. My name is Hunter Watkin. I'm a tech startup investor at Rampersand, an early stage venture capital firm, and I'm on a mission to learn out in the open with those curious to understand what's currently possible when it comes to emerging technologies, and bring to light how people and companies are overcoming the obstacles that lie ahead. This season is all about carbon-related technology. I'll speak to guests using tech, engineering and science to drive carbon removal and reduction projects, as well as the investors and leaders mobilising change in what many of my guests are calling the decisive decade. You can catch every episode by subscribing on Spotify, YouTube and Apple Podcasts, or following me, Hunter Watkin, on LinkedIn and Twitter, so you don't miss a beat. Before diving into this episode, please be aware that nothing expressed throughout constitutes financial or investment advice. We hope you enjoy. Today I'm joined by Katherine Mcconnell, the founder of Brighte. Since 2016, Brighte has helped over 120,000 households make the switch to clean energy, enabling more than $1.6 billion of home electrification equipment to be financed and accessed sooner by Aussie households. The use of this equipment is offsetting over 1 million tonnes of CO2 a year and is also saving customers $215 million annually. To get there, since 2015, Brighte has raised $145 million in equity and $575 million in public debt. Katherine, welcome.
Hunter, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Katherine, one of the reasons I was so keen to have you on was that I feel your journey to starting Brighte is quite honest and candid, rather than suggesting that you were a born entrepreneur. Are you able to tell us a little bit about your early career and the sequence of steps that led you to start Brighte?
Yeah, absolutely, Hunter. I wouldn't have classified myself as a born entrepreneur, and I definitely fumbled a little bit way through that first year or two. So I have so many learnings. But I did an arts commerce degree, so Japanese, economics management. Started working in superannuation, got into Macquarie Bank, did a few years in government as an economist, and then went back to Macquarie. I was at Macquarie for about 14 years in total. And so it was there that I learned about energy financing, and it was where I started to get the technical experience and contacts that made me understand what the opportunity, the friction and the problem was in the renewable energy and clean energy space. So, it was great to have that experience in such an entrepreneurial company. Really taught me a lot about managing risk, a lot about managing reputation, and I effectively, believe it gave me just that really great foundation to be able to start a business that has a huge credit and regulation and risk focus within the business, as well as, the finance and lending. So I left. The reason why I left was because I believed that the opportunity in clean energy in the future was going to be huge. And I knew that because personally at home, we'd gotten solar. We'd been an early adopter of batteries. And I was really excited about the energy savings and the climate change savings and benefits. And I thought they were going to be much bigger in the future. And I heard firsthand from different solar installers around the country that they didn't have a product they needed to solve the friction at the point of sale. And I knew from my work experience that you could create that product, but just the big banks weren't going to be able to do it. And so, some type of magic moment of confidence and a lot of hard work and investigation, gave me that confidence to resign. And I remember my heart was beating and I was, really, really scared during that resignation. But that jump off the cliff effectively was the best decision I've made in my life, aside from marrying my husband. So, it was the best decision I've made in my life, and, definitely no regrets about that move.
And you and I talked a little bit before we started recording about pre-seed company valuations and the difficulty and challenges you found raising. And I think you said an $8.5 million valuation after you'd already poured $1 million of your own money into the business. Can you tell us a little bit about the level of conviction that you had in yourself and how that formed?
Yeah, Hunter, the risk was real. I hadn't ever heard of pre-seed funding, so that's why I'm always intrigued about it today. I thought that how you kind of get the business off the ground is putting your own capital in, developing a product that's used by customers, and then showing that you've solved a problem and you have some traction, and then seeking some external funding. And so that was just my mind approach. And so before I resigned, we absolutely got our house refinanced and was able to get equity out of the home, and made some life decisions where we were able to free up some capital within our household budget, and kind of allocated some money and said, like, listen, you have to run as fast as you can to be able to get that product market fit, because this money is going to run out. And so that's definitely the burn the boat mentality, and you've got a lot of motivation to work hard and work fast. So that was the activity that happened, and the risk was real, because if that money didn't eventuate in any outcome, that was money I'd have to pay off the mortgage and have to go and get another job and increase the repayment on the home. And so that was real. I remember for the first year just paying all the salaries out of an account that I kind of set up. Originally, it was the home mortgage account. Was then able to get up a business banking account set up for Brighte. But yeah, it was definitely very real, and felt that daily. And very supportive husband, and life partner who really helped me also get the confidence I needed to be able to back myself to make the decision. Because once you had the capital, that was one thing, but the second thing was really believing that the problem was real, that you could solve that problem, and then third, that you would then be able to convince people that they'd back your idea and your capability, because they also believed in the problem and the opportunity.
And before getting into the weeds, I think it's helpful for listeners to just understand sort of the bounds of what Brighte does, who you serve. What does Brighte do? What's the problem it's solving, and who are the customer set that you target?
Yeah, so the problem that we solve has expanded since we've started. And so when we started, initially the problem was the friction that exists at the point of sale for both the vendor or the solar installer, as well as the household who's buying solar. And so the friction that exists, it's a high value purchase. The purchase is about, $8,000-$9,000. It's too big for a credit card. They don't have the cash, the customer, and they'd have to go and get a loan for that purchase. And so that makes them leave the point of sale. So usually when they leave, the experience from the vendor, the installer, was that's too much friction. The conversion doesn't happen. They just forget about it. So they leave the point of sale. And so the problem is that the customer needed a frictionless credit product at the point of sale that would give them instant credit approval, that could be offered by the solar installer, that would make them go ahead with that purchase. And so it was a pain point that was experienced by both the vendor and the customer. And the vendor had the additional pain point of working capital. And so they were incurring costs, because our experience is from the point the customer accepts to go ahead with the sale, it's about 28-30 days later that the solar is installed on their roof, and the solar installer is incurring costs throughout that 30 days. And they're all small businesses. So we were also helping that vendor by doing the credit check, taking the credit risk on that customer, and guaranteeing that they'd get paid as soon as the job's done. So yeah, so they were the problems and the friction points.
One thing that we see a lot of in venture capital is people talking about channel partners and the fact that they'll go to market, which is access and sell to customers through channel partners. A lot of the time, there is insufficient incentive for that channel partner to engage. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you get in front of customers, which is particularly important with consumer businesses, that you do so efficiently?
Yeah. And so I mentioned in the other question that the problems changed. And so when we started, the problem we were solving was just for vendors. And so, they're our channel partners. And so, I explained the problems that they have that we were solving. But those vendors effectively offer the credit product that we have to customers at the point of sale. And it solves, the customer problem, solves the vendor problem. And they either do that, at the point of sale in the customer's home on our app. They do it over the phone when the customer calls them, on our web portal or on our app. And so, via that interaction, we then have direct interaction with the customer, and we're providing credit directly to that end household or that end customer. The business has expanded in the last period of time, and over the last 18 months, we've also taken government on as a channel partner. And so we've got the ACT government and the Tasmanian government as customers now. And so they're channel partners. And so the government effectively has climate targets that they've legislated that they have to meet. And in order for them to meet those targets, around 40% of national carbon emissions actually come from households. And so households have to change the way they consume energy. And so they won't make that change unless it's affordable to them. And so incentives or subsidies are needed. And so government want to distribute subsidies. They have to get these different solar installers or electrification vendors in the home, but they don't want to be exposed to that risk or the messy part of dealing with them. And so what they've effectively done is they've appointed us as their administration and finance partner. And so we're managing their schemes, and they're leveraging off our finance capabilities, our credit policy, our collections, our ability to navigate, train, and manage these vendors. And so, what we've done is in the first part of the business, we've built up the ability to have a large national network of vendors, distribute a credit product via them, and kind of manage both customer and the vendor from a risk perspective. And then now we've leveraged those capabilities to government. What's really great is that what we're seeing is when we distribute a government program, we're now seeing we have, for instance, market share of 80% in the ACT for solar installations, for residential solar installations. So it leads to great market share outcomes for us, and also a great partner that we've been able to expand credit products categories and different program capabilities.
Amazing that you've got such strong endorsement from the government, and it really demonstrates why VCs look for policy and regulatory tailwinds, because it can really help catalyze, I guess, the mass adoption of a product like this. Taking a step back to when you've quit your job and you're sort of sitting there thinking, how do I get this off the ground? You know that the maths works, but you need to prove it to investors. How, with a foreign consumer credit business, did you get from 0 to 1 and ultimately get yourself in a position to raise capital, external capital?
Yeah, when I was at Macquarie, I'd actually set up solar consumer financing businesses. And so I'd had the understanding of how to do that, and how to work through the credit and the funding and the risk kind of issues. And so obviously it's very different when you do it yourself from day one. But I wasn't coming into it with no experience. And so part of it, I was able to replicate what I saw, but then part of it was new as far as the tech platform and the app and removing the friction, which wasn't happening in the experiences that I'd seen. And so how you go about it is, I remember just drawing workflows effectively. So swim lanes of workflows, just to understand all the different journeys that were happening between vendor and customer, and then understanding at each of the different, interactions, what was needed. And, was it policies? Was it funding? So I had kind of like sub workflows. And then I started, for me, the biggest area was just signing up vendors firstly, and then working through how I was going to build scalable funding were the two big points, because setting up the regulation and the processes around credit, I felt I had a good understanding of just steps you had to take. And so, yeah, there were lots of different streams. When I started, I was effectively doing sales, doing ops, doing credit, and then was able to build that team out to help me.
Specifically, what is your reflection, perception of what gave investors conviction in you? In addition to obviously your insight, was it traction? Was it the early customer?
I think I was able to show an existing credit product that was in the market and able to clearly articulate what the gaps were for that product, and then clearly explaining and articulating what the energy problem was and how it was different to other products that these companies were focusing on, how it needed different onboarding for the vendors, different training, different risk. And so that was what I did. And what I realized was I got best traction with raising seed funding from people who understood the credit model in my seed round. And so that I was able to introduce to some people who'd started some credit lending businesses, and they got into the details and they saw that I could speak to the details and the technical parts. And so I found my believers effectively. And in the first round, it wasn't the energy believers, actually, it was the credit believers. And then in the second round, that was where Mike Grock came on. And so they had energy as a thematic, and they saw that the credit model worked, and they believed in the opportunity that energy had up ahead. And that's where I was able to then, get that buy-in. But I think it was really important to find your believers and not try and convince people of the problem, but find someone who understands a segment of that problem that you're solving, and demonstrate that you're experienced in understanding how to solve it.
Well, you certainly found your believers now. You have 120,000 households using Brighte. What has happened between when you first raised, let's call it around 8 years ago, between then and now, that has made building a business like this easier and made it make more sense for the customer?
So I think the change in government last year at an Australian federal level definitely had a huge impact. One of the things we keep hearing is that the climate wars are over. So, there's acceptance that we're aligned on what our targets are. And so the government are developing their plan now for how they meet the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And they're starting to put funding behind that. And they're also starting to look at policy changes that need to be made. So they're doing submissions, and they're doing stakeholder engagement. And so they're starting to look at what are the policy changes they need to make to also meet those climate targets. And so that's the biggest thing, because I think in the earlier years, there was definitely the debate around, is climate change real? And so we used to just largely speak to the affordability benefits that households get from putting solar in or energy efficient products in their home. But now we can also start to speak to this imperative around Australian government is one of the few countries in the world that's legislated our emission targets, and they have a legal obligation now to make changes, and they're starting to put funding behind that. And so, that I can't, overestimate how big that is. And that's led us getting these government programs, for example, because they're recognizing they have to make changes and they have to stagger how they meet those targets. So that's one big thing. Definitely another, tailwind was unfortunately Ukraine and Russia having their war. What that's done is it starts to raise awareness about the cost of energy rising. Is gas a transitional asset? It's started to really heighten an awareness around getting off gas sooner and electrification of the home. Another issue that's really stemmed to that is in Europe, we've started seeing the uptake of batteries just really increase. People are wanting energy independence. In the US, we've seen that. And so I think now people are starting to think through, do batteries make sense? And so definitely early adopters are still doing this, but I just think it's what's happening globally, politically around energy reliability, security, with energy bills going up for a variety of reasons, including Ukraine-Russia war. People are starting to not just think about solar, they're starting to think about batteries, they're starting to think about electrifying their home. It's either starting to make sense financially on its own, or government incentives are starting to flow through to make that economic for the household. So I'd say the only other thing that we're now starting to work through is the Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions and the impact that has on corporates, because corporates are going to start to have reportable obligations at some point. They are in the US and they do in Europe, and understand how their customers are using energy intensive carbon equipment. And so, we're starting to look there at how we can help corporate partners, not just government, deliver programs. So there's lots of tailwinds. Yeah, lots of tailwinds.
There's a huge amount. I want to almost talk about all of them. We'll start from the latter. So is Brighte open to potentially servicing corporates, not just consumers?
So currently we do some via our direct vendor network. We do financing of commercial currently via government. So for instance, in the ACT government, we are currently financing households, community groups and business. And we're doing it for, EVs, electrification and solar. So it's not just solar. So we definitely have capabilities now to be able to do, beyond solar household and do have track record in that.
I want to return also to one thing you mentioned about self-sufficiency and the the tailwinds behind people wanting to be independent. With sort of direct to consumer marketing, have you talked about these topical affairs with how you target them, or are you really focused on just educating on the importance of the economical benefits of moving to solar? Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, it's interesting, to be honest, the majority of visitors to our website are actually our vendors. We do education, content, awareness direct to customers. We do it direct to customers via the government programs. And then we do it to existing customers. However, going back to the channel that we have to market, it is through those partners. It is through government, it is through vendors, and so they often are the party that has the primary role in influencing or educating the customer. And so we also provide a lot of tools to those parties and marketing and tool support to those parties to better help them. So we have a great calculator that the vendors, the solar installers use at the point of sale to show energy savings. And it's more scalable to be able to do that as well because, B2C acquisition's expensive. We do have a like a lead, generation capability where customers can come to us direct, and then we distribute those actually as free leads to our vendors. And via the government program, obviously, we have vendors in those state governments that are telling us all of their leads are coming from us via those government programs. I think it's just being really clear around what our role is, where it's most cost effective, particularly in this new economic environment, and B2C can be not very cost effective if it's not your primary business model.
Agreed. Having a scalable go-to-market for D2C is something that you've obviously been able to prove out, but is a really big challenge for consumer-facing products. Before we move on from the tailwinds, one more
Yeah.
question. I think that climate founders have one extra challenge that founders in other markets or industries don't necessarily have, and that's in addition to talking to and understanding the customer and the problem, they need to be advocates for some sort of change because you are preempting a future, a positive future, but you need to spend time educating consumers or your customers and government on why things need to change. How do you balance your time between playing that advocate role and being super product focused, understanding the customer, how they're engaging, and maybe a bit about how that's evolved over time?
Yeah, interesting question. So when we started the business, our primary product was buy now, pay later for consumer solar. And then, now, working with government's a big chunk. And so the buy now, pay later industry itself has gone through huge changes. And we're currently in a Treasury report where submissions have closed to review regulation in the buy now, pay later industry. So, just thinking about the engagement there, I'm on the board of the Australian Finance Industry Association. And so they actually administer the code for buy now, pay later. And so, so I definitely participate in the finance industry. What I find is there are fires sometimes. And so when you are dealing with a fire or when you think there could be a fire up ahead, that's where more of my time definitely is in around, preemptive stakeholder engagement. We commission independent economic reports that speak to the benefit of Brighte in job creation, the economy, the value and benefit we provide to our customers, the vendors, and, do a lot of engagement with these independent economic reports. And so, so time allocation really, really depends on what you anticipate these fires are going to be. On the clean energy side of it, I've early adopter of battery. 2015, had solar since 2009, EV for 2.5 years, off-grid farm. So I'm definitely living it, love it. I think the reason why I first got into it though was affordability. The economics made sense. And if they didn't for all the equipment, I saw that they would. So I saw genuine value benefit for the user. And the second was this secondary benefit for the economy and for the community around climate benefits. And so that's the position that I've always taken. And I think it has to make sense economically first in order the other benefits to make sense, unless there's a legislative imperative that makes it make economic sense. So but similarly, we're currently feeding into government submissions processes at a local, state and federal level to kind of shape what we think government's response should be to meeting their climate targets. So, we're obviously advocating for things that have worked successfully, for programs that we're engaged in, leveraging partners such as Brighte to be able to get better leverage and amplification of their own funds. So the percentage of my time, sometimes it's like 90%, other times it's just, 5%. It really depends. But I think I'm going through a period now where it's both the BNPL and the energy stakeholder engagement.
I feel like these fires can be good fires. You're not necessarily putting out spot fires. I feel like it's on opportunities to refocus your energy. Any tips and tricks for cutting through to government? Because you've obviously done an amazing job. Government probably has an unfair rap of being able to engage quickly and build comfort with something as a distribution partner. Any sort of secret sauce for the audience that's looking to replicate?
Well, I worked in government in Canberra for a few years. And I briefly worked for 6 months in a consumer policy area. And I actually have a real empathy for the people, and I have a real soft spot for understanding the framework that they work in and how it sometimes isn't fast. And that doesn't mean the people you're working with are not smart and their intentions are not the same as yours. So I think my first thing would be to come with it from that approach, and to also understand the limitations that the public service government have in working with the private sector, to understand their processes and understand, how decisions are going to get made and who decision makers are, and does a tender have to happen, or, is it fitting into a budgetary process? Or I think it's so important to do that, to be able to understand, how you best allocate your time and, who you best work with to get the outcome. And then I think that there's an element also of awareness that people have to have of who you are, and that can't happen just at that decision point. I think you really have to work on people understanding who you are, what you do, what your capabilities are, and how you can benefit a certain outcome. And for instance, there can't be a decision that's about to be made, you lob a response in or a tender in, and it's the first time anyone's heard of you. I think you've got to have done the groundwork at all the different levels, working with government departments and other task forces and industry associations and politics, opposition government, and, potential power brokers, to be able to really navigate that whole outcome.
I'm laughing to myself a little bit because I can see why writing out workflows and sort of decision trees is kind of ingrained in the way you think, and preempting the next move of whoever it is you're engaging with, and the importance of it to, I guess, the success you've had. I might ask you some questions you would have had to answer before. The first one is a classic one. It is the question of how you improve over time. VCs obsess over whether there's a tech advantage in something that you're building. You are a tech-enabled business. How do you think about how you make sure you stave off competition?
So I think what we've learned is that in our space, there's only a certain amount of margin or kind of price that people will pay for value or differentiated experience, firstly. And so it's not a business where you can just keep on creating, amazing experiences. I think there's a threshold that you have to have. And beyond that, I don't think people will really pay for that. And so that's probably a learning. So you definitely have to always make sure that you're at the top of the pack with that experience. And that uses tech. That uses, tech, and it can use AI, and it can use that in the credit. And, using that can give you better approval rates and lower losses and late payments, if you do that really well. So that's table stakes, I think, really, in a credit kind of lending business. I think our network of vendors, it's not a tech moat, but it's being able to manage a national network of effectively tradespeople, so plumbers and electricians, and being able to navigate the risk that's involved with working with them to distribute kind of credit products and to distribute energy products to customers, because there's a lot of OH&S and WH&S kind of issues. So it's a huge kind of risk and regulation piece. And so it's being able to do that in a scalable and cost-effective way creates barriers to entry. And it's not a tech answer. Do you know what I mean? It's not a tech answer, but and I think that may have been hard potentially at the start for people to understand that we're looking to invest in tech businesses, that could be a barrier to entry.
Absolutely. One slightly sensitive question that I think is a really important one, particularly during these tough capital times is when you take venture funding, you and your investors are hopeful that you are going to chart a path to growing a super scalable, huge business. With that, however, comes a sort of shared agreement. It's probably not in writing, but a shared agreement that you will optimize for capital efficiency along the way. You had to lay off staff in the past, and there may be times that you have to do it in the future. What's your reflections on how entrepreneurs that are building businesses at the pre-seed and seed stage should think about whether they take the venture path or perhaps try and bootstrap, do debt or revenue-based financing? How do you sort of reflect on that decision?
Um, Mine was a really capital intensive business, so I didn't have the option. But I think if you're a business that can bootstrap and can generate revenue to cover your costs, and I think in pure tech businesses, you potentially have better chance at doing that. Like I would have done that. Yeah, I would have done that if I could have. I think now people would believe in you even more if you could do that. I think the market's definitely rewarding accelerated pathway to profitability and being able to grow your business in a sustainable way. So I actually think being able to prove that you could do it would give you options around getting funding in the future. And then you'd have the choice as to, how you wanted to grow the business. But, a lot of people don't have that choice. The decision we made last year to lay off people in 2 rounds was around preservation of capital to extend runway. And we heard from the market what they viewed a successful, business would be one that could show they were sustainable and could achieve profitability. And we felt that growth projects with a long payback weren't also going to be rewarded in, the next few years. And so we made some decisions to pause or shut down those businesses. And that effectively gave us the ability to have greater focus on our core and just some adjacent areas for growth, which we knew were able to deliver revenue, some of them upfront from day one. And so, that was the decision that we made. And I think it's one that others have also made or are looking at making. And I think the thing that I'm most relieved about is that we did it soon. So we didn't sit on that decision because you were effectively just burning cash every month that you did that and reducing your runway. And so, yeah, we did our first round in June last year and then again in September. And it's put us in good stead, definitely, to weather out the, choppy waters of the economy in 23. Yeah.
It's not as exciting, but it is really important to reflect on. I think optionality and flexibility is super important at the moment without foregoing the growth ambition and mindset. We chatted about this a bit before the show. It's an interesting trade-off. One of the things that I always try and make sure is a big focus of the podcast is trying to find out what the most pressing challenges are for a business like yours right now. We've kind of talked about government, talked about funding. As you're a business that is on a path to maturity, what is the most pressing challenge 5 years ago evolved to what it is now for Brighte?
So 5 years ago, actually one of the problems we were facing was around buy now, pay later. And we had a single credit product focus within the business. And so, if regulation happened, that was going to be really impactful to the business and our revenue. So what we did was we got a credit license, we created a different product, and we also expanded our the segments that we were financing, beyond solar. So, we diversified effectively. Getting a credit license wasn't easy, and being able to distribute a product wasn't easy. So that definitely diversified our position. Now, I'd say it's around government regulation, just around how they're going to deliver on their energy commitments and energy targets. Are they going to go down the US Inflation Reduction Act way, which has created growth year on year in solar of 40%. So it has huge impact, and they're relying on the private sector to help distribute programs. And so I think it's, again, government regulation, in the energy space. And it's a really big focus for government around mainstream Australia affordability of energy. It impacts inflation, and they're trying to keep inflation down. And so it's just, what they do in how they achieve their energy targets, how they keep inflation down and impact that has on a business that's focused on energy.
I cannot begin to imagine. You've done an amazing job, but the challenge of building a business while also somewhat agitating for change. What is probably the most prevailing thing that you're really proud of about what you've built with Brighte? And is it what you expected it would be?
Um, I'm probably proud of two things, and so one is like holding life together as I grew a business. So I've got two beautiful kids in high school now. When I started, they were just starting kindy and second grade. So it's amazing that we've got a great family and held life together, because that's so important when you grow a business and it's so chaotic. And the second thing really is just the team that I work with, and that they've stuck in for the ride, and they've stuck through the ups and downs. And I love working with them, and I love what they've created over the years. So they're people things that I'm most proud of, and they're really tangible. And yeah, do they surprise me? I never really thought about it. I only kind of thought about what if it didn't work, and how was I going to pay off the home loan? And that really just involved going and getting a day job. It was a bit naive, I think, jumping into it all.
Yeah. You need that naivety. Like in hindsight, people often say, you've got to be naive. You can't foresee all the challenges.
Yeah, you'd
Otherwise you won't
never
get
take the
started.
leap. Yeah,
No.
absolutely. You'd never take the leap.
Final question. If you weren't fully immersed in and completely entrenched in the day-to-day of Brighte, what would you be doing?
I've talked about this with my kids, actually. I do a permaculture course. So I really like gardening. So I have this lovely garden on our farm, and I just, love gardening all weekend. And so I do a permaculture course. I always look enviously at the people who work at the botanic gardens, just plodding along gardening. And I've always wanted to do some volunteering for some different community groups. And so yeah, it's never the born founder from day one. So I'd really love to do all these other things, but yeah, definitely switching off and following some personal passions with greater time and energy.
I had this interesting conversation with my team where I perceive, and this is probably just a function of being a 25-year-old early in their career, I perceive gardening as being something like a hobby that you earn in the future.
Yeah.
Like once you've sort of achieved everything you want to achieve and you're settling down. Like my mum loves gardening. That's all she talks about now. She's semi-retired, and I'm like, that's fantastic, Mum. I'm not interested right now, but good on you for achieving that.
Yeah.
And I hope to one day be an avid gardener, but it's awesome that you can do both at the same time.
Yeah, I love watching things grow. I love growing things from scratch, and I think it's kind of what I've done at Bright over the years. And so I think it's using the same type of concept of having a blank piece of land and digging it up and creating something amazing. And so I think same type of skill sets, in a really in a different way. I love
Awesome.
the thought of your mum, when you're old, you'll do it. So I don't know
Yeah,
how I
I'll
should
join her one
feel
day.
about that. Yeah. Thanks, Hunter.
Awesome. Well, plenty of growth still to come for Brighte. I hope to soon be a customer. I'm not yet, admittedly, but so cool to have you on the show, Katherine. It's been a thrill, and really look forward to sharing this with the Abstraction audience.
Thanks. It was wonderful.